Hello everyone, and welcome to the first in a series that I'm calling Sage Advice. It's the middle of January, but I thought it'd be a good time to talk to you guys about getting into your garden, getting ready for your garden, and one of the things that I know I personally struggle with as a gardener is growing herbs. So this series is going to focus on herbs and spices and what they're good for and how to grow them, and maybe a few experiments on exactly what to do. So the two things that we're going to cover is sage and parsley, and then I'm also going to show you a little gardening trick known as winter sowing. So we'll do that together as well. So our first herb that we're going to talk about is sage, and it looks like this: big green fuzzy leaves. I've never grown sage, so this will be the first year that I try it in my garden, but I have been around the plant and I know that it gives off that musky smell. It's kind of a strong herb, and for that reason insects actually avoid it, so you don't have to worry too much about insect control if you plant sage, at least for that plant in particular. But sage can grow in a container or directly in the ground, and once it's established, it's fairly easy to grow. It will kind of maintain itself, so to speak, and so not too difficult of an herb to try for beginners. This is what it looks like dried out, and of course this is bought from the store, but you can use it fresh. And sage is often found in terms of food use, heavy stews or meat dishes, because it's such a strong herb, you want to use it in something that can like handle it, I guess. So like a pot roast or chicken, or that's really what sage has normally been used for. But great thing about sage is that it's good for memory and brain health. You can make a sage leaf tea for sore throats, so it's a good sore throat remedy. It also boosts your immunity and aids in digestion. So we think that is why sage started to be used in the heavy meat dishes, because you need a little boost in your digestion after eating, a big bowl of stew. It can also be good for symptoms of menopause, so hot flashes, night sweats, helping balance out those hormones. It's all around good herb to eat. So a few things to know about sage if you're going to start it from seeds is that you need from 6 to 10 weeks of starting the seeds before the last frost. They take a longer time to germinate than other seeds. They're a little bit picky about their soil temperature. So for southern Wisconsin, we tend to be in zone 5, which means the magic day typically for the last frost would be June 1st. So that puts planting seeds or starting seeds indoors at around April 5th, but you can start earlier if you want to have like an indoor herb garden, because herbs do quite well inside, or if you have large enough pots to start your plants in that your plants won't get too big in order to transplant to the garden. I'm going to go ahead and experiment and try starting now, so right at the end of January. That's definitely a little bit early, but I haven't decided if I'm going to do an indoor herb garden, or maybe I'll do both inside and outside and see how they grow. It's just something we're going to try. But sage seeds are very, very small. In fact, most herb seeds are small. Kind of tiny. It looks like little teeny tiny round ball there. That's a sage seed. and they like plenty of light and warmth. So you want a nice warm spot for them in your house. And we don't want to plant them too deep, just barely below the surface of the dirt. So if you picked up a take-home kit from the library, you will have a little manila envelope with some seeds in there for you, and then you'll get a little planting pot, a compostable seedling pot. And these are my pots I'm going to use this year, and I already wrote sage on here so I don't forget that that's what's going to be in there. But I filled them up with some dirt, some good potting soil, nothing too heavy, works great. Doesn't have to be super fancy potting soil, but use the dirt of your choice. And for sage seeds, always want to plant more than one little seed in your little pots here, because like I said, they're kind of picky. Your germination success rate is going to be a little lower on sage than on other plants. So I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle a good amount in each pot, and I can always thin them out later after they start to sprout. It does take a while, like I said, 2 to 3 weeks for germination. So don't give up on your seeds. Just make sure that there's space and light and plenty of warmth, around 70 degrees. If you're an avid gardener and you've got those seedling mats that warm up the plants from the bottom, go ahead and use those as sage. Definitely likes that. Once your plants do sprout, they want to be 6 to 10 inches high before transplanting. So that's why you really want to start, 8 to 10 weeks before the first frost. You want a good sized plant so that it can survive the transfer. So I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle my seeds right on top of the dirt. My dirt's already pretty moist, so I don't need to worry about wetting my dirt down. And then I'm just going to really fill it up. Now you don't have to use compostable pots. You could go ahead and use a milk jug or any kind of pot. If you're gonna grow it inside, of course, and you have a nice pretty pot, go ahead and sow it right in there. And then when you're using pots like this, it's a really good idea to water from the bottom. So I might have like an old cookie tray or something, and I'll put this in it, and then I'll go ahead and water around the pot so I don't displace the seeds. That's important because your plants, your seedlings are very fragile. They have very delicate roots once they start growing, and so a good way to water it, maybe even with a spray bottle instead of pouring, a glass of water or a watering can of water right on top. That's a little hard on the seeds and the seedlings. But sage needs good air circulation. So once your plants start, you want them to have plenty of room, not overcrowded. They don't like to be wet, so don't spray their leaves. Spray, the bottom of the pot, get the dirt wet. You also don't want to fertilize sage. That's important because those big broad leaves, they tend to absorb smells. So when you're eating your beef stew, you don't want your sage to taste like fertilizer. So avoid fertilizer, especially for this plant. And then once it does bloom, it will get flowers. Pollinators do like sage, but they don't like the annoying insects don't like the smell, so they don't stick around too much, but they will come to the flowers. You want to pinch those flowers off before they bloom unless you're trying to get seeds. That will keep the taste of the leaves a little better. And then in the fall, you want to prune it back and mulch around it. Cover it with mulch, the roots, so that it can come back. And it's really simple and easy to use sage in terms of eating. You can trim the fresh leaves, and you want to trim from the top and the outer edges of the plant so that you don't kill your plant. And to use them fresh, you just rinse them in cold water and then add them to whatever dish you're serving. If you want to collect a bunch and dry it, you just hang it in a cool, dark place for several weeks. And then you can crush it up and put it in a mason jar or something. Like this is crushed up dried sage. So that's sage, and I'm gonna grow some and give it a try, and we'll see what happens. And if you picked up the kit, I've got a little recipe for some easy sage chicken for you to try. So go ahead and use your seeds, plant them, start your seedlings, and go ahead and see what you can make from that. So our second herb today is parsley. And parsley, like sage, is from a very tiny little seed. But it is different in several ways in that it is a biennial, meaning it comes back every 2 seasons. So the first season, you let it grow, you can harvest the leaves and eat it, but then you leave the stalk there because it needs to overwinter in your garden in order to be able to come back. And then the second year, it'll grow back and bloom and have seeds, and you can collect those seeds and so on and so forth. So it's a biennial, it's a little different of a plant. The other difference is that where sage likes full sun, parsley can actually be grown in partial shade. So if your garden is kind of in a slightly shadier spot, or you have a slightly shady spot, parsley should do okay there. It is also a nutritional powerhouse. So, here's what it looks like. And we've, of course, all gone to the restaurant and had the little parsley on the side of our plate, side of a decorative garnish. But actually, it's really good for you to eat. Very high in vitamins. So, vitamin A, B12, C, K, and tons of iron. So if you're looking for an herb that is good for you nutritionally, parsley is definitely it. It also promotes kidney function. It stimulates digestion just like sage does. And there's also been some research done saying that parsley is good for Alzheimer's or dementia, or helping alleviate symptoms of it and really improving brain function. So all around good green herb to use. And of course we think of Italian food when we think of parsley. So the recipe for this one is a parsley pesto. Pretty simple, basic one, but would be good to try with fresh parsley. So growing our seeds, I have another pot here labeled parsley. And the interesting thing about parsley seeds, before you plant them, it is a good idea to soak them in water for 24 hours ahead of time. So if you're watching this video and are excited and want to plant your seeds, make sure you soak them first. So don't plant them right this second. Get them wet for 24 hours and then plant them. You want to go about 8 weeks before frost, so about the same time you're doing your sage. And this type of pot, a compostable pot that you'll put directly in the ground or the flower bed or wherever you're planting your parsley, is actually the best kind to use because parsley seedlings are very fragile. They're delicate. So using them or planting them in a pot like this is much better for the plant when you transplant it. So I would highly recommend using this. They like warmth, so warm soil, but they don't need as much light as sage. So remember, we said they could survive in partial shade, but a sunny spot would help it be warm. So I would stick with sunny for now, especially if it's indoors. Maintenance is pretty simple. You want to cut back any dead or eaten leaves because bugs will like parsley. That is kind of the downside of growing this plant. You will have to check it for different bugs and things, and Also make sure that you don't overwater parsley. It can be quite picky about its conditions. It does like damp soil, you know, don't want it to dry out, but don't overwater it or you could end up with some kind of growth, you know, mold growth and such. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and plant my little parsley seeds, and I drained the water out of my little bowl here that I had the seeds in. I'm just gonna go ahead and stick a few in the dirt here. Nothing fancy. Kind of tricky because they're wet. They kind of stick to your fingers, so you might have to try a couple times. And again, herbs are a little more delicate, a little more tricky to germinate. So it's always a good idea to plant more seeds than you think you need in the seedling pot. And then when they start to sprout, you can go ahead and thin them out. But like I said, maintaining this plant is not too difficult. You just want to cut back any dead or eaten leaves because they do attract bugs. When you are harvesting to eat, you want to cut from the outside of the plant. So if you have leaves growing in the inside and then the outside, harvest the outside first because you want that stalk to be able to develop really well, especially if you want it to come back again and get seeds the next year. You need to have a good, decent stalk established. And parsley's good fresh, and of course you can actually keep it for about a week in the fridge after you've collected it. Just rinse the leaves and then place them in a paper towel, like between two damp paper towels. That will keep your leaves fresh. You can also freeze parsley, so you could cut some up into smaller little pieces and in a little freezer safe baggie and put them in the freezer. Or you can dry it like the sage. Just hang it in a cool, dark place for a couple of weeks and crunch it up. It'll be like this, like you buy in the store. Nice dried parsley. So yeah, I hope you go ahead and try planting both sage and parsley and that you enjoyed learning a little bit about these herbs. I'm excited to grow them and see what happens and see how I can use them in my kitchen and in my cooking. But I have one more thing for you yet today, and that is we're going to talk about winter sowing. So winter sowing is a technique where you plant your seeds in containers or a greenhouse or something like that outside in the middle of winter, and you just let nature determine when the seeds should germinate. So the technique I'm going to use and try this year is I'm going to use milk jugs to make mini greenhouses that I can try to germinate some seeds in. Now, I have never done this before, so we'll see what happens. But through my research, I've learned a few things, and the first thing you need are containers, of course, and anything works that has a lid as long as it's deep enough for 3 to 4 inches of soil. So I'm going to use a milk jug, but you can use ice cream bucket or 2-liter bottles for soda, anything transparent plastic, and room for dirt and headspace for the seedlings to grow. And the type of seeds you want to do are ones you want to look for cold hardy plants or cold crop vegetables, and it will say right on your seed packet like if you should sow it in the fall or directly outside in early spring, or they're self-sowing seeds. So I'm going to try a couple of different kinds of seeds. I have a whole bunch of old seeds I saved, and so I decided I'm just going to experiment with different types of plants and see what happens. They might grow, they might not, and that's okay. Gardening is a learning process. So let me show you the materials I'm going to use to winter sow. So here are my basic supplies for the winter sowing. I have an empty washed out milk jug. I don't need the cap. I have a sharp knife, a pair of scissors, some duct tape. I have a paint pen, and I'm going to try using some cilantro seeds. So those seeds are supposed to work pretty well for winter sowing, so we're going to give it a try. Here are 3 containers that I've already prepped and sowed some stuff into. Now basil is an herb and it might not work, but I want to experiment and try. And then I have a type of squash and some cucumber seeds in that one. So just a few containers to see how it works out. You're also going to need some potting soil, so I just have a real basic black potting soil mix there to use. So the first step in making my little greenhouse here is I need to cut the top off. But I'm not going to cut right here where the handle of the milk jug meets, because I want to create kind of like a hinge for my handle for my little greenhouse, so that the lid can stay on, but I can still open it if I need to in the spring. So taking a very sharp knife, be careful, but I'm just gonna poke a starter hole. Then I'm also gonna poke some drain holes in the bottom of my container, because you don't want the snow and the rain and the natural, precipitation to just fill up your jug. Then your plants will drown once they do start to germinate. So, 4 or 5 holes poked in the bottom. Some people use like a metal rod. They just get something really hot and burn the hole, melt the plastic and burn the hole. But a sharp knife works just as fine, and there's no danger with fire. So go ahead and do that. And then I find it's easier to have the drain holes in before you cut the lid. A little more stable plastic then. But nice sharp pair of kitchen shears go right through the plastic. You just go all the way around. Doesn't have to be perfect. But just back to here, so that you have, again, I got this part attached. So now I can have a movable lid. So then after you've got that ready, the next step is to just fill it with some of your potting soil. And if your soil is really dry, you're gonna wanna wet it down before you plant your seeds. But real simple, don't go too high. You do want some space for your plants to grow. So here's a milk jug that I already have ready to go. And I've got my drain holes in it and just added my dirt. And now I'm gonna go ahead and add my cilantro seeds. And cilantro seeds are much bigger than sage or parsley seeds, but I'm just gonna sprinkle them around and kind of spread them out. I don't wanna spread them, put too many in, because I do need room for the plants to grow. So stick them in. My soil's already a little damp. I'm gonna cover the seeds gently with my fingers here. So that they can grow. And then you just, good thing to do after your seeds are in is to take this to the kitchen sink and give it a nice gentle shower. If you have one of those kitchen sprayers, real gentle so you don't displace your seeds. And so it's got a nice amount of moisture to start the germination process. The trickiest part about winter sowing is probably taping the container back together. So I find that putting a little piece on the front here, like that. Helps hold the milk jug together while you tape the seam all the way around. That way it doesn't like squish in on you. You want to leave space, and you want to let light get in. So you don't want to tape the entire container, just where that seam is. Because again, you're creating a little miniature greenhouse. I usually go around twice just to make sure that we have a nice seal. Okay, there, not too difficult. The lid, you don't keep the lid on because you want some rain, water, and snow to get in there for moisture, and you also want some ventilation. But it's real simple, it's all you need. And it's also always a good idea to label your jug. So I'm using a paint pen because Sharpies tend to fade in the sunshine. So if you have a paint pen, especially an oil-based one, that's a good idea to use it on your jug to go ahead and label it. You could also just label right on your duct tape here. Some people use the little plant markers inside the jug before you tape the lid on. You could also write on the bottom of your jug, because then the sun won't fade it. So, but no matter what you do, it's a good idea to label it because come spring, you might forget what's in each jug. And that's exactly what you need to do with winter sowing, is forget about it. Stick it outside in a sunny place with plenty of ventilation and where it can get rainwater or snow. And the only thing you need to do is check it for sprout. So especially once the weather gets warmer, you want to start looking for plants growing. And then when it gets, April, May, then you definitely need to check more often because it probably will need to be watered. And if it's warm and sunny out, you probably want to untape it and take the lid off. But it may still be cooler at night, so then you may want to cover them back up to keep frost from killing the plant. So it's really just a way of hardening off plants, growing strong plants, because you're letting nature decide and germinate it. Rather than artificially heating it up in the house like, oh, it's nice and cozy, you're gonna make tough, hardy plants with this winter sowing. And then when frost is gone and you've got good seedlings that are tall and strong leaves, you go ahead and you transplant them into your garden just like you would the little seed pots that you're starting inside. So that's all there is to it with winter sowing. Very simple. Use some recyclable materials to make your little garden start growing. I hope you enjoyed this first little episode of Sage Advice. And don't forget, you can pick up a little take-home kit from the library. We have some seeds in there and a little seed pot and some dirt to get you started, as well as a couple of recipes and handouts to encourage you on your herb journey. So I hope you all are happy and healthy and excited to start gardening again. It's a new year, time for some new growth, and we'll see you next time.